About 10 years ago, I moved into a new house with my wife and our young daughter. She was just a toddler at the time. It was a nice neighborhood, quiet and filled with other families. But what really excited me wasn't the house itself, it was the yard. Before this, we had lived in a cramped townhouse with barely any outdoor space. This new place, it sat on almost a full acre. And from what I could tell, most of the homes in the area had similarly sized lots. It felt like a huge upgrade. After we settled in and moved all the furniture inside, I started thinking about all the things I wanted to do with the yard. It needed work, nothing terrible, but definitely some attention. There wasn't much landscaping to speak of. The grass was patchy in places, with some dead spots. And the backyard was littered with weeds. So, not long after we moved in, I went outside to tackle some of the yard work. My wife stayed inside with our daughter while I got started. I remember spending a few hours pulling weeds, raking, and just trying to get a feel for the space. Eventually, I realized I needed a few supplies, so I made a quick trip to Home Depot. That part of the day was pretty uneventful. I don't remember much of the drive or the shopping. It was just a typical errand. When I got back, I returned to the backyard and walked over to the side of the house where I had been working earlier. From there, I had a partial view of the street out front. The street was usually quiet. Just your average residential road, with very little traffic. But a short time after I got back, I noticed an older car pull up and park along the curb. It came to a stop between our house and the neighbors. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe it was someone visiting. Then I saw a man get out. He wasn't carrying anything. He didn't knock on any doors. He just stepped onto our lawn, onto our property, and stood there. He didn't say anything. He just stood, staring at me. Then, slowly, he began walking toward me. The direction he was moving, so slow, it was almost unsettling. I didn't recognize him at all. By that point, I had already met both of our next-door neighbors, as well as the ones across the street. This guy wasn't any of them. He hovered there, kind of standing still, kind of inching closer. It was like he couldn't decide what he was doing, or maybe he was pretending to hesitate. I wasn't sure. I stopped what I was doing, put down my tools, and began walking toward him. I figured maybe he was lost or needed something. But before I could get close, the man suddenly turned. He didn't say a word. He veered to my left, toward the front of the house, and quickly disappeared behind the corner, out of sight, hidden now by the house itself. That struck me as strange. I sped up, walking around the side of the house to catch up with him. When I got to the front yard, he was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd walked up to the front door to knock or ring the bell. But when I looked, no one was there. I rushed inside and immediately called out to my wife, just to be safe. "Did anyone come in just now?" I asked. She looked confused. "No, no one's been here." "Why?" Relieved, but now more curious than ever, I stepped back outside and scanned the front yard again. Still nothing. Then I walked the perimeter of the property. I even checked the backyard. But he was gone. Completely gone. I wasn't sure where he could have gone so quickly. There were a fair number of trees and bushes between properties, but not enough to fully hide someone. Not unless they were deliberately trying to disappear. Still, I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he had just cut through our yard on his way to another house. Maybe he was visiting someone nearby and got confused. The whole thing felt strange, but I didn't know what else to do. So, I went back to work. The rest of the day was productive. I got a lot done, and the yard was starting to look a lot better. But sometime later, after several hours had passed, I happened to glance toward the street. The man's car was still there. That gave me a weird feeling in my gut. I hadn't seen him again, but he hadn't driven away either. Still, I kept going. I figured maybe I was just overthinking it. But then, something happened. Out of nowhere, I heard a sound behind me. A rustling. Like movement through the grass or leaves. I turned around. And there he was. He was in my backyard again, standing about 50 feet away from me. Just like before, he didn't speak. He only looked at me. I called out, asking the man what he was doing in my yard. He didn't answer. I started walking toward him, but as soon as I did, he turned quickly and began walking in the other direction. He moved toward the edge of the property and disappeared behind a cluster of trees. I followed, trying to keep him in sight, but by the time I reached the area, he was gone. I looked around and called out to him several more times. No response. I had no idea where he went. Eventually, I gave up searching. It seemed like he was off my property now, and I really didn't know what else I could do. Still, something about the whole encounter felt off. Suspicious. So, I went back to work in the yard, though I kept glancing over my shoulder every now and then. Maybe 20 or 30 minutes passed before I heard a car door shut. I quickly moved toward the front of the house to get a view of the street. That's when I saw it, the same old car was pulling away, driving off down the road. I immediately felt a wave of relief. Knowing he was gone made me feel a whole lot better. I went back and finished up the yard work for the day. By the time I was done, the backyard looked much better than it had before. Then I went inside. The next morning, when I got up and looked out the window, my heart sank. The backyard was a mess. Someone had gone out there during the night and ruined nearly everything I had done the day before. Grass torn up, weeds pulled out and thrown around, dirt patches disturbed. It was all wrecked. I was furious, but also creeped out. Deep down, I had a feeling it was the same guy. The one who had been wandering around the day before. Of course, I had no proof. I spent most of that day redoing all the work. And then, not taking any more chances, I went out and bought a set of security cameras. I installed them around the house that evening. But after that, the man never came back. It's remained one of those strange little mysteries. Years have passed, and I still don't know who he was or why he targeted my yard that way. Many years ago, when I was younger, I moved into a new apartment. The building itself wasn't anything fancy, pretty average, really, but it was in a decent area, and the price was right. I had barely settled in when strange things started happening. It's hard to remember exactly whether it was the first night or the second, but it didn't take long. Late at night, probably around 11 p.m., there was a loud knock on my door. It was very strange. I remember getting up and walking over to the door. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. That's what creeped me out the most. The knock was very clear. Very deliberate. It wasn't a mistake, or some casual thump. Whoever it was wanted my attention. But nothing else happened that night. Still, for the next 3 or 4 nights in a row, there would be more knocking. Always late at night. It wasn't at the same time each night either. Sometimes it would happen around 10 o'clock, other times closer to midnight. I usually stayed up pretty late, so I was always awake when it happened. But each time, when I went to the door, whoever had knocked was already gone. It was starting to get unsettling. I couldn't tell if I was being pranked, or if someone had the wrong apartment. But I had just moved into the building, and I didn't know any of the neighbors yet. In fact, I hadn't even seen anyone on my floor during the move-in. So how would anyone even know I was living there? I couldn't figure it out. Then, on the 4th night, something different happened. After hearing the usual knock, I got ready for bed a while later. I had just laid down and was trying to fall asleep, when I heard it again. Another knock. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the wall, right behind my head. I sat up in bed instantly. My heart was pounding. This wasn't an accident. It didn't sound like someone had bumped into the wall or dropped something. It sounded deliberate. Just like the knock at the door. A sharp, forceful pounding. Could it be the same person? Maybe my next-door neighbor. But how would they know exactly where my bed was? I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, it didn't feel like one. The knocking stopped after that. No more sounds for the rest of the night. Still, it took me a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, when I was leaving for work, I walked past the apartment next to mine, the one I assumed the knocking had come from. It was the very last unit at the end of the hallway. As I walked by, I noticed something. The door was open. Just a crack. I had to walk past the door to get to the stairs. For a moment, I considered looking inside. Just a quick glance. But then I thought, no way. I walked past it quickly and didn't look back. When I got home from work later that day, the door was closed again. I wasn't sure what to make of it. The whole thing had me confused and more than a little uneasy. As I was approaching my apartment, I saw someone standing in the hallway. It was a woman, probably in her 60s. She was walking in my direction, maybe on her way out. I decided to say something. I greeted her with a friendly "hi" and introduced myself. She seemed very nice. Friendly, even. She told me she had lived in the building for almost 10 years. I asked her if she knew who lived in the apartment next to mine, the one with the open door. She told me that the unit was currently vacant. No one lived there. My stomach dropped. If the apartment was empty, why had the door been open? And more importantly, who had been knocking on the wall that night? The thought unsettled me in a way I can't quite explain. A vacant unit, with knocking coming from inside. I told her about the knocking I had heard, and she said I should definitely report it to management. She also said she hadn't experienced anything like that herself. When I got inside, I made up my mind. If it happened again, I was going to report it immediately. That night, it happened again. Another loud knock on my front door. Late. Just like the other nights. I followed through and reported it to the building's management. They replied with a simple message saying they would look into it, but didn't offer much else. The knocking happened again the next night, same time, same sound. And worse than that. I heard it again on the other side of my bedroom wall. Right behind where my head rests at night. That time, it really freaked me out. At least, I thought to myself, whoever it was had never actually tried to enter. I thought maybe I had just missed it. Or maybe I'd imagined it. But then, the following day, I got an update from the building management. They told me they had caught the person who was knocking on my door. Apparently, for some reason, the door to the unit next to mine had been left unlocked. Someone had been sneaking into the vacant apartment. And late at night, they'd been coming to knock on my door. They were caught on surveillance cameras. I was incredibly relieved that the cameras had been there. Without them, who knows how long it would have continued. They didn't tell me who the person was, or if they got in trouble, but after that, it never happened again. This next part takes place when I was a kid. I was around 10 years old when my family moved into a new house. It wasn't a brand new home, but it was a bit newer and nicer than the one we had lived in before. The best part? It was still in the same city. That meant I didn't have to leave my school or say goodbye to my friends. The people living there with me were my parents and my older sister. The neighborhood was pretty typical. A row of homes, each with a small yard, all lined up along one quiet street. Nothing about it seemed strange. But literally within the first few nights after moving in, something happened that I've never forgotten. Everyone else had gone to bed, but I was still up late. I was sitting in the living room, playing video games. All the lights were off except for the glow of the TV. I planned to go to bed soon, but I was just having too much fun gaming. The volume was turned down low so I wouldn't wake anyone. That's when I heard something outside. At first, it just sounded like a few cars driving down the street. But then I looked over at the window. Everything outside was completely still and quiet. What I saw next made me pause my game. Two SUVs were slowly driving down our quiet, residential road. And then, they both pulled over. Not just anywhere, but right in front of our house. That made me nervous. I sat there, controller still in hand, watching. I crept over to the window. I was sitting on the floor, mostly out of view, but I had a good look at the front yard and the front step. After the vehicles stopped, both doors opened. I saw about 5 or 6 men get out of the back seats. The drivers stayed inside the cars. I was so creeped out. All the men looked shady, dressed in dark colors and hooded sweatshirts. None of them wore masks, but I still feared the worst. A couple of men started walking toward our neighbor's house, while 2 others headed right into our front yard. My heart started racing. I ducked down, trying to stay hidden. After a few moments, I heard footsteps. The men got right up to our front door. One of them tried to open it. Thankfully, it was locked. I was so freaked out that I didn't want to look, afraid they might see me. I didn't hear anything for probably 2 full minutes. When I finally found the courage to peek, both men were still just standing there, on the front step. I had no idea what was going on. Then, suddenly, I had an idea. I didn't know what made me brave, but I stood up and walked over to the door. I didn't open it, but I flipped on the outside light switch. The light on the front step flickered on. Moments later, I heard the men turn around and start to walk away. I went back to the window and watched as they returned to their SUV and got inside. Just then, I saw 2 other men jogging from the opposite side of the neighbor's yard. Then they got inside the other SUV. About 30 seconds later, more men climbed into the back of the first SUV. I was so confused. Moments later, both SUVs started their engines and drove away. I stayed up watching the street for about another hour, but they never came back. After that, I was finally able to go to sleep. The next morning, I told my parents about what happened. They had no clue what it could have been, but they didn't seem too concerned. Still, I was there, and I will never forget how scared I felt in those moments. Looking back, I still don't know exactly what was going on. Going to someone's house like that after midnight couldn't have been anything good. They certainly weren't salesmen. A few years ago, I moved into a new apartment with a roommate. This was a much better living situation for me. The last place I lived was a large house where I rented just one small room. I had a tiny bathroom attached, and there were about 8 other people living in the house. It was old, and the only reason I stayed there was because it was cheap, and it was all I could afford at the time. Moving on to my new apartment, it was a 2-bedroom place that I shared with a roommate named Jack. I had known Jack from college. We weren't really close friends, but he was a cool guy overall. About a week or 2 after moving in, I remember both Jack and I were at home. I had just gotten back from work, and Jack was already there. It was sometime in the afternoon. When I walked in, I saw Jack was in the kitchen. He told me he was going to the store and asked if I needed anything. I said no. At that point, I went down the hallway into my bedroom. It was really nice because we each had our own bathrooms attached to our bedrooms. After going inside my room, I headed to the bathroom to take a shower. About 10 minutes later, I was out of the shower and getting dressed when I heard someone try to open my bedroom door. The door was locked. I had gotten into the habit of locking my bedroom door from my previous living situation. Of course, I assumed it was Jack trying to open my door. I mean, who else would it be? I wasn't sure if he was back yet or if he had never left. It seemed kind of odd because I thought he was going to the store. I was busy at the moment and figured I would ask him what he wanted in a couple of minutes. But he hadn't said anything. Still, I found it strange that Jack would just try to barge into my room like that. He had never done that before. I finished getting dressed and shaving, then left my bedroom. This was probably about 5 minutes later. I didn't see Jack in the living room or kitchen, so I went over to his bedroom. His door was slightly open, but I could tell he wasn't in the room. I called out, asking what he had wanted, but he didn't answer me. So then I went back into my bedroom and texted Jack. I asked if he was at the store. He responded pretty quickly, saying yes, he was almost done shopping. I realized then that it couldn't possibly have been Jack trying to open my door. I heard the sound of the front door to our apartment open, and then close. At that point, I called Jack and told him what was going on. He realized he had forgotten to lock the apartment door when he left. I ran over and locked the door. Whoever had been in our place had already left. Then I went back to my room. About 10 minutes later, when Jack returned, we both searched the apartment. Nothing was missing or stolen, and nobody was inside anymore. So who was in the apartment, and why? We never found out. It remains a mystery. But neither of us ever forgot to lock the doors again while living there. I live alone in a house that I'm renting in a fairly average neighborhood. I moved here last year, and something really crazy happened shortly after. It all started one day when I noticed a car parked a ways down the street. It was across from my house and a little ways down. It stood out because it was a red car, so it caught my attention. I went outside to get my mail at the end of the driveway. As I did, I noticed there was a man sitting in the driver's seat of the red car. I found that strange. It was strange because I had noticed the car out there about an hour earlier. So had he just been sitting in the car the whole time? When I saw the man, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking down, probably at his phone. I casually turned around and walked back inside the house. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me. As it got later and the sun started to set, I was passing by the front of the house again. I noticed the red car was still there. The man was still in the driver's seat. Then, I saw that his driver's window was down, and he appeared to be taking a picture of my house or something. His phone was out and sort of pointed in my direction. I didn't think he could see me or anything, but I moved away just in case. Several minutes later, when I looked again, he was finally gone. It was a pretty weird thing, but he was gone now, so I figured that was that. As strange as it might have been, I just hoped he would never return. But I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was at home by myself, and it was much later at night. I didn't have work the next day, so I was staying up pretty late. I was in my bedroom when I suddenly heard a loud banging coming from the back door. I got up, instantly thinking someone was trying to break in. After leaving my bedroom, I started heading toward the back door but slowed down. I heard another loud bang and looked around to see if I had any kind of weapon. I really didn't. Maybe I was unprepared, but I just never thought someone would try to break into my house. Then I heard whoever it was trying to open the back door. Thankfully, it was locked. I went over and looked out of a window. I barely saw what looked like a man there, but I couldn't make out any details. Everything was happening so fast. For some reason, I did not call the police right away. Looking back, I don't know why. You'd think that would be the first thing to cross my mind in that situation, but I guess you never know how you'll react until you're actually in it. So there I was, at the back door, with some guy trying to get in. I had this crazy, spontaneous idea and took out my phone. No, I still didn't dial 911. Instead, I went to YouTube and searched for a really loud and annoying alarm sound. I clicked on the first video, and thankfully I had forgotten to turn my volume up because an ad started playing. I skipped the ad, turned my volume all the way up, and hit play. The annoying alarm started blaring. Thankfully, it worked. The guy at my back door stopped trying to break in and moved away. He then went around the front and left my property. After I calmed down a little, I finally came to my senses and dialed the police. They came out and looked around, noticing some slight damage to my back door. I filled out a report, and the police said they would look around for the man. However, to my knowledge, he was never found. I believe it was the same man I had seen days prior. I don't know for sure, but to me, those two suspicious situations seemed connected. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since.